Hola, bienvenidos a Argentina. This is from Buenos Aires. Today is going to be a little bit more chill than usual. We're doing an introduction into the topic of asking questions because even though we've already covered things like verbs and how to conjugate them, who our subjects are, some nouns, adjectives, how do we put those into dialogue where I am posing a question, you're answering it, vice versa? So I'm going to give you a real broad strokes on that today. This should be short and sweet. Then we'll go into a little more detail in 7B. And then we're going to round it out with some sentence structure hacks and ways to also make your other sentences, questions, or otherwise a little bit more refined. So let's get started. Just so you know, we're going to use just present tense today. So we're not going to incorporate anything too complicated. It really should build off of what you just finished doing, which was the review of present tense all throughout 5 and 6A and 6B. So let's get started. Okay. There are two different ways you can ask a question. You already know this in English, but I'm just going to tell you what you already know. You can ask a question. The first way is using a question word. And this is kind of what we more traditionally think of. This is something like, who is your best friend? Where is the bathroom? So we're using interrogatives, which are like the who, what, where, when, why. Pero there is another way of asking questions where we're just starting with a verb. And in English, these don't sound quite the way they do in Spanish, but it sounds like can you, do you, things like that. So for instance, do you know how to swim? Or can you be at my house at 5 p.m.? Those don't use question words, but I'm still posing them in a way that requires a response. So if we can help it, I know I put it as number 2, but if we can help it, this lesser known way is a really simple way to communicate when we're newer in Spanish. Here's the thought. If I want to pose you a question, ideally I'm going to understand the answer, right? So let's say I say, ¿Cómo estás? That's a really common one that uses a question word. Technically, though, I can answer whatever I want. Okay, so if I'm responding, I could say, estoy abrumada y un poco nerviosa porque yo tengo un fecha tope en mi trabajo. And you're like, whoa, I was not ready for any of that, right? Because it's an open-ended question, okay? The close-ended question is more like, oh, ¿estás bien? Oh, are you good? Oh, sí. No, or, and maybe you do get another response, but the most likely thing you're going to hear when you ask a question número 2 is sí, no, or maybe is tal vez. That's a lot more predecible. It's more predictable. So I recomiendo when you are newer to your Espanol, you are taking the plunge and asking a question, try to get a set list, like a drop down of answers that you might be hearing. Sí, no, tal vez, no me importa, I don't care, whatever. But it's not going to be as open-ended as, what do you do for a living? Or where do you live? Where I might hear something I'm completely unprepared for. It is where we get the most interesting answers. So I know this is kind of counterintuitive to when you were in la clase de inglés, maybe in high school. You're supposed to ask open-ended questions. In sales, you're supposed to, ask questions, listen to the answer. That's not what we're doing here just for now while we're building our skills. But let me give you a couple ejemplos. So if we're using what's called an interrogative word, who, what, where, when, why, you would want to use those with this little upside down question mark. We're going to start the word out right away as an interrogative. So como, a dónde, and cuándo in these examples. And then we're going to follow that with our verb and then our subject. So this is actually a really important thing that's going to happen in 1 and 2. Our order is reversed. We know this from Inglés. So if you're asking, how are you? I've put the verb are before you, right? And here, this is the exact same thing. I just added hoy to be fancy as today, but it's how are, ¿cómo estás? The tú is implied here. So you usually don't even hear it, but it's ¿cómo estás tú hoy, right? And that order is different than if I'm stating to you, you are, happy today or sad today, which normally don't tell people how they feel, but why not, right? You would say, tú estás feliz, or just estás feliz, estás triste. That's a statement. This is the question. Now, I'm going to do a deeper dive on all of our question words in la próxima lección 7B. So when you feel ready to understand, okay, I know there's dos maneras, two ways to pose a question. You want to get into those interrogative words because you either want the review or you've never learned them. Fantástico. I would encourage you right here to pause. See if you could make an adjustment to any of these just to test your skills. So, por ejemplo, here's a little quiz for you. Could you make this, how are we today? Like if you're a presenter or something, or how are you all today? Are you able to make those adjustments? And if you do, what things are changing? So you can try that one on a piece of paper. If it's where are we going, it's where are you going? So we're just making, as you can probably tell, little tiny tweaks to the verbs. Now, this one's not really a fair question because I don't think I've taught a lot of ear to this point, right? You will get into that later. So let me just show you what I'm talking about. So if you wanted to use a different example, you'd say, okay, well, I still want the same question word because the to where or a donde doesn't change, but perhaps I could change from vamos to a donde van ustedes. And what I'm doing there is I'm changing the conjugation of the verb ir. Can you believe that? The verb is ir, but it's voy, wild, right? But I am required now to include the ustedes. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but I need to know who that van goes with because whenever you've worked on your charts, you've always seen yo and tú all by themselves, right? As well as nosotros. That's why it's not really necessary. But ellos, ellas, ustedes, I'm not really sure, right? So I need a little bit of help with that, okay? If you want to change this one, change the vocabulary. Cuando empieza is when does whatever start? When starts the dinner is how this is written. What about when starts the concert? When starts the tour? When starts the movie, right? So I know this sounds awkward in English, but I'm trying to show you the mirror image of what the Spanish is saying. So try a different vocabulary word, flip through your flashcards, or think of something you'd like to say. If you're like, oh, why don't I just do breakfast and lunch while we're here? So try filling those in on your own. And as always, having a pen and paper next to you, having this printed out and writing some things in the margins, you want to really work with the material as opposed to just seeing it, as I'm always saying, right? Okay, these question words you're going to come back to. Your last assignment, if you're paused or have been pausing and writing things down, how many question words can you think of off the top of your head in Spanish? If this is un repaso, a review, you've already gone through this, maybe you're intermediate. My hope is that you could list all of them or maybe forget one or two without looking, okay? So just trying to jot those down. Start with the English, say, okay, what do I say for who? Well, that'd be quién or quiénes. What do I say for how? It's como. And just see how many of them you remember. This is a really good primer for our next lección where I will break them down one by one. But why not start now, right? And especially if you've already come into contact with some of these question words, think about some of the phrases you know as well. So from lección 1A, right? Think about the questions that we were learning how to ask, like, how do you call yourself or where are you from? You have a couple question words in there that maybe you can utilize in this instance. And then número dos, this is what you can start doing right away. Because of all your hard work with presente, you'll notice we've got quieres and puede. All of our favorite verbs are irregular, friends. Don't fool yourself, okay? So if you want to say, do you want, I've decided to make this informal. I'm saying quieres, tú is implied. So I could just say quieres una bebida or quieres tú una bebida. It's a bit redundant. It's not hurting anybody, but feel free. It also, if I put the tú here, it's very obvious it's a question. ¿Quieres una bebida without a, you know how when we ask a question, it's kind of like the Valley Girl stereotype. We got to like go up at the end with our tone. So it'll sound, the question would sound like ¿Quieres una bebida? Versus ¿Quieres una bebida? That's a statement, right? So throwing in this tú makes it really clear it's a question. I mean, feel free to just be a cartoon character and go, you know, do the hands. The more expressive you are, the better in the beginning, I believe. And for me, just throughout life, right? That's just my jam. But basically, you're going to try to include the verb first, then the subject if it's needed, which you're going to decide. We'll talk about that. And then whatever the next thing might be. It could be another verb, like this example. It could be a noun, like it is here. It could be just an adjective, whatever it is, right? So that's where our vocabulary comes into play, which ojalá means hopefully by this point, we're really starting to gain some traction with our vocabulario. We're spending a little more time on it, right? Because that's really going to help us. Okay. Here's what I haven't covered though. This doesn't just say want a drink. That's what we would say in English. I feel like that would be what would be said in like the James Bond movie, right? But grammatically in English, if we're posing a question, we say do. Do we, do they, do I in the present. This do is not hacer, to do or to make. It's a placeholder. It's basically English saying, we don't have this fancy upside down question mark that Spanish has. How else am I going to make it clear this is a question from the start, right? Because you want to be pretty cued in that somebody's asking you something so that you don't miss it, right? So that's how we do this in English. However, with the use of poder, which is the verb can or be able to, I don't have to do a do situation here. I can say, can you? And then that makes it a question again, because I'm putting my verb first, I'm putting my subject second. It cues the person. Can you wait is different than you can wait, right? So we're really mirroring. Now we know both questions and statements. Up until today, if this is brand new to you, you've probably been speaking mostly in statements, or you've been responding to questions I've been asking with a statement of your own. So this one's interesting porque tenemos puede usted and then my next verb. So that's actually kind of tricky. Right after you've said your first verb, you can actually nestle the usted in the middle here. We'll talk more about sentence structure, things like this in 7C. So I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but just try to observe this. And again, if you've got pen and paper, switch out the noun here. Ask, do you want blah, 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 a new car? Do you want a minute? And then down here, puede usted esperar? Ask me a different verb. Can you, formal, right? Ask me if I can help with something. Ayudar. Puede usted ayudar. Puede usted venir a la fiesta. So try something new so that this is a template that you're swapping new things in for, okay? So for this one, we're maybe saying, what can I change? And for this one, what can I change here? So that we're not just taking it as it lies, right? Not memorizing phrases that we don't care about. Okay, so let's get into a couple more little hacks here, but this is the main bit of what we're trying to cover today. And this is just a little bit of extra información. So if we're using these como and cuál as that open-ended question, just remember you have no idea what the answer is going to be, right? So you're letting it be kind of an open-ended response, sort of like a text box. Have you ever done a survey where it says, how do you feel about this? You can write whatever you want, happy or sad. You want more so, how would you rate this? And it's good, bad, indifferent with a drop down. That's going to be a close-ended question. And those are going to be kind of yes, no answers, starting with do you, can you, right? Things like that. There are some other iterations like will you and have you, but those are using tenses we haven't covered yet. Just know that that is a possibility where we're starting out with that verb first. Okay, when we're actually in a dialogue, we naturally do this so seamlessly in English, we don't even think about it. So I'm just going to call to mind something that you're already doing really well in English. It's very similar in Espanol. So primero, most of the dialogue you have with me in class or maybe with a close friend is going to be a tú question, which requires an accent from me. Ay, Dios mío, in both cases. Okay, so if I say, ¿Cómo estás tú? You're going to respond with yo, right? So that's a really common, just kind of, you see that arrow of conversation or of dialogue play out all the time, right? It's also muy común en libros or in shows. You're going to see people talking one-on-one a lot, okay? And if they're familiar with one another, it's like this. Maybe if they're unknown people to one another, it could be an usted and a yo type of situation, but the same thing. If I'm talking to ustedes, which as you probably noticed throughout these videos, sometimes I'm like talking to you as one individual person. Sometimes I'm like, hey, everybody, hey, you all. And if I'm saying, how are you all doing? Or are you all understanding this, right? Which if I'm saying, are you all understanding? I'd say, entienden ustedes la materia, right? Or the material. You might respond with, I understand, if it's just you. But if you were ever in a group where everybody's feeling the same way, you can say, nosotros entendemos, we understand, right? So I don't know if you've ever run into that where you're at a party or something and you're standing next to your partner or your family and they say, how are you all? And you're like, well, I just want to respond for me, right? So yo or nosotros if you're a part of that group. And just to get nerdy for 1 second before our sentence structure comes in, this is first person singular. This is first person plural. So it's basically that you are one of the people in that group now. So it makes it a we, just in case I ever talk about it that way again. If we're being a little gossipy or even just talking about somebody else, we might say, where is she? She is in the bathroom, right? So we'll use ella and respond with ella. The great news about this is you don't have to really do anything. So let's listen to this play out. If I say, ¿Dónde está ella? You're just going to borrow pretty much everything except the question word and say, ella está en el baño. So I'm not changing the conjugation. I'm kind of just repeating it back, but taking out donde and adding my place of baño or el museo or wherever it might be. Okay. Tú y tu hermano. Okay. Well, now I'm talking to you, and tu hermano means your brother. We haven't gotten there yet, but I'm now creating a group of people that I'm talking to. It's kind of similar to ustedes, right? So I'm grouping two people together, you and your brother. I'm getting a little more info out of you and your brother than I am from ustedes, right? You might look around and be like, am I a part of that group? But if I just hear you, who I'm looking at, and your brother, I know dos personas making up that ustedes. And again, you can respond as nosotros, but you also could say, well, if someone says, where are you and your brother living these days? And you say, oh, well, yo vivo en Chicago, pero mi hermano vive en Texas. So now we're splitting out because the answer is not the same. See? And then if it's Sandra y Marta, right? If we're talking yet again about other people, I have a little more information here than just they, right? Ellas. But I can respond either way. It's a little redundant. If you listen to the dialogue here, if I say, ¿dónde viven Sandra y Marta ahora? Where do Sandra and Marta live now? I can say, ellas viven en el centro. They live downtown. Or I can say, Sandra y Marta viven en el centro, which is sort of stilted to say, where do these two women live? These two women live, it's just sort of repetitive. So often we will kind of drill down and take out, especially if it's a lot of people, right? If it's Sandra y Marta y Martín y Jose, we'll just go with an ellos probably in that case, because it would be a mixed group of gender. Okay, so you're probably familiar with these scenarios, but I want you to take a quick pause right now and think about your individual Spanish journey. Okay, so what type of escenarios are you in a day-to-day situation? Are you an enfermera or a nurse and you're talking to the parents of a kid and you're trying to say, you all will do this treatment, or you're just talking about the kid saying he is sick? Are you someone who has a lot of one-on-one dialogues with amigos, or is your partner a Spanish speaker, or are you talking to suegros, your parents-in-law, right? That would be an ustedes conversation. So just try to figure out which of these rings most true for you and write a couple down that you would be prepared for, so that when you're hearing the question, you already are kind of ready. It's like being a boxer, when somebody, it's not a punch, right, necessarily, but when someone makes a move, you kind of know what your next move is in response. Okay. Lastly, you might be able to use the exact same verb back if the question is like we talked about earlier, where is she? She is in the bathroom. ¿Dónde está el perro? El perro está en la casa. But not always, right? If I want to ask you, ¿qué haces este fin de semana? ¿Qué haces este fin de semana? Pause if you want to write that down, or if that's causing you any trouble. I'm using a question word, which is what. So my question, if you haven't paused yet, is what are you up to this weekend? What are you doing? It sounds like what do you do, but often we hear a little bit of ing in that English translation. You're probably not going to say I do right back to me, right? Or I am doing. You're going to pick the action that's most appropriate. I am swimming. I am traveling, or you could say, yo cocino una gran cena para mi familia. I'm cooking a big, dinner for my family. So just be prepared that you might hear a verb and that's not the one you want to give back. So you just be listening, especially with hacer, I think is a really common one. If someone says, what did you do last week? What are you doing? What are your plans? You might not be responding with the same verb. And if you ever want to kick something just right back to the other person, because you're just as curious, you could say y tú, but remember in these escenarios, you might be saying y usted, y ustedes, right? It really depends on the scenario, but this is the most basic one. One person who you're familiar with asks you some really cool question, right? About like, who are your favorite classical authors or something, right? And you say, oh, mi autor clásico favorito es Hemingway. y tú, and you're just like, same question to you. It's like playing tennis where you just hit the ball right back, right? And you want to hear their answer. Now, if you are estudiando conmigo, studying with me in class, great. We can do this together. So we can play 21 questions. If you have a Spanish speaker en tu vida, in your life, you could play this with them. So the idea is it's like a very infantile game from when we were kids, but you think of un objeto, try to think of something reasonable. Don't be like, I was thinking of a sprocket, you lose, right? Think of something muy general, right? Maybe it's un árbol, like a tree, or la mesa, the table, something simple. And then the otra persona who's playing with you is going to pose yes or no question. So take a second to think, okay, if it's a yes or no question, are you going to be asking who, what, where, when, why? Or are you going to be asking more close-ended? And maybe you can see the hint, it's sí or no question. So you only get to ask a yes or no. You don't get to ask them, what color is it? You get to say, is it negro? And they go, ¿es negro? No, no es negro. So you get your yes or no. You get 21 preguntas en el juego normal, in the real normal game. You can do this as long as it takes, or just do 10, who knows? Depends on how simple your object is, right? But there are some good ones like es vivo, is it alive? Es caro, is it expensive? And note that we're saying is it, just using es, right, for ser. So it is built in to our conjugation. So give that a try. It's a really fun way to make things kind of a mystery, make them dynamic. One of my cosas favoritas when I was learning was playing games and reading mysteries. ¿Por qué? Misterios are los mejores because you're getting little teeny pistas or hints throughout. And then at the end, you get this answer and you're hopeful that you're like, I saw this coming, or you're like, whoa, how cool. But there's something to be understood at the very end, which is who did it, right? Or what happened. So if you ever get into reading, as you get a little more intermediate, there are some, I can give you some recommendations of some books that have a little mystery to them where you're really kind of hanging on every word to understand. Okay, as per usual, I've got some oraciones for you to traducir or translate. Primero en español, segundo en inglés. So we'll just try one or two as we usually do so I can keep this brief. So let's try this first one only because, well, it's número cuatro, but this one I have here, because you might be upset with donde es. It's muy extraño, but this is saying, where is the party? I mean, like I'm a 20-year-old again or something, right? Pero the es, if that's frustrating you, let me call us back to our práctica with ser en estar way back when in lección 3. This is an events location, the party. Let's say it's some big shindig, right? And so I'm going to use ser for that, as opposed to our standard location is going to be estar. So 90% of the time you're going to be saying, ¿Dónde están mis zapatos? ¿Dónde está, no sé, ¿dónde está el supermercado? But in this case, the event is what I'm doing this S for. So that's my first translation. We're warming it up. We're seeing a lot of question words. If that feels unfair to you because you're like, you didn't teach me question words yet, that's 7B. Está bien. I would take 7B, print it out, or have it pulled up on your computer, only for the sake of, hey, I don't have these down yet, so let me just take a peek. It's also a way to kind of warm you up for the next lesson and get you some familiarity with these interrogatives or interrogativos. Okay, down here, I'll do one that has an interrogativo because that's not quite fair. Okay, let's do this one. So why is hard to remember, difícil recordar. This is going to be por, two words, ¿por qué? I don't know why this doesn't want to be capitalized. Okay, ¿por qué es? Is it un problema or una? You're wondering to yourself, ¿por qué es un problema? Why is it a problem? There's no it, as you can tell. We're just saying es, right? If it was a person, place, or thing other than it, we would need to put that probably here, right? Because it comes after the verb in the question, okay? So this is my innocent, ¿por qué es un problema, right? Let's say I've done something and I'm feigning innocence, perhaps. There's only 17 of these en total, so feel free to take a peek at the intermediary ones we didn't get to. But writing your own oraciones soon is going to be muy importante. Best thing you could do is say, okay, right now I'm only prepared for yes or no questions, and I want to play 21 questions with a friend. What kind of questions would I ask? That's a good warm up because it gives you a topic. Also, just trying some, what verbs do I know? Like, can you, or do you need, or do you have? Things like that you would come across maybe in a travel situation or at work. So try these first. And if you're feeling really bold or brave, or if this is review for you, throw in some of these question words that we're going to go over en la próxima lección. So buen trabajo hoy. We've just gotten started with our questions. We've got a little bit more work to do here, and then you're going to be using questions throughout your time speaking Spanish. We'll get really fancy with them later on with different tenses, lots of cool vocabulary. But for the moment, we're just trying to understand the structure. If you need to go back and do this video otra vez, totally recommend. Maybe try the ejercicios along with me. It's going to help you in the end. Te prometo, I promise. And I'll catch you when you're ready to go with those interrogativos en 7B. Muchas gracias. Ciao.